Hey folks, welcome to Grab a Stack of Rock. This is 50 Years of Iron Maiden, episode 4. Just Mike and Harrison this time, and we're going to be doing a triple play of Paul Di'Anno live releases. In this episode, we'll cover the EP Live Plus One, the home video Live at the Rainbow, and of course, the EP Maiden Japan. Right, Harrison?
Yep.
All right. Well, then let's begin, shall we? So chronologically speaking, Live Plus One, which this is not a real official copy. This is a CD that I burned because this is a holy grail item, folks. Live Plus One. This came in between the first and second album. It was released on 25 December 1980, having been recorded in July 1980 at the Marquee Club in England. There are 4 tracks. Sanctuary and Drifter are exclusive, with Phantom of the Opera being previously discussed on our Killers episode with Martin Popoff, and Women in Uniform being previously discussed on our Iron Maiden episode with John Clauser. So Harrison, do you have any thoughts about this release and these tracks?
I think it's certainly an odd release, cover art wise, in that it doesn't feature Eddie on it. There are only a few of the band's releases that don't have Eddie on it. Other than that, it's interesting that they chose to put one of their old single. Well, I say old singles, but Women in Uniform was out as a single at that point. It was odd to put it on this live EP sort of thing. I'm sure they could have grabbed in another track from the Marquee if they really wanted to. Allegedly, there was a version of Iron Maiden from this show that was played on a BBC documentary back in the day. So, yeah, I think it's odd that Women in Uniform was on there, given that it was a single. But no, I like the selection of tracks, even if I'm a bit tired of Sanctuary by now. It is hard to get excited about Sanctuary, considering how much it shows up on the in the rest of the discography throughout the years. But it's still a good version. And as we touched on Drifter, the immortal yo-yo-yos from Di'Anno are always a treat. I'll never get tired of that.
I agree with you there. And as far as Sanctuary becoming tiresome at any point, I find this version to be the most raw of the officially released versions that we've listened to so far.
Yeah, there's a definite rawness to this whole performance. Di'Anno's guttural growls are at probably their most growliest here. And if when you, in particular, when you listen to Phantom of the Opera, you get an idea of just a taste of how fast they like to play that song. Which, if you've listened to the Maiden Japan bootleg, you'll know they take it up to like thrash metal speed on here. Yeah,
absolutely. I also think that this version of Drifter is probably the screamiest version vocally. And man, Clive is really heavy on that bass pedal. You can really feel the energy. So you know what? I'm going to go on record here, Harrison, by saying that the live version of Drifter from the Marquee Club on this release is the superior version of Drifter. I'm going to put my foot down and I'm going to stamp it, and that's what I'm going to say.
I'll agree with that for certain regarding the Di'Anno thing. I mean, I'll always have a soft spot for Bruce Dickinson's Hammersmith version, where he's like, "All the lazy bastards from EMI are up the back," but I can't deny that it's Di'Anno's song through and through.
In terms of being a frontman, to be truthful, Bruce Dickinson's more my style. He's very comedic on stage. He's got a very tongue-in-cheek sense of humor, and I think, well, we'll get there, but that is a benefit that makes it different from a Di'Anno version. But with Di'Anno, you just get this earnest yo, 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 and he's just so into it. He's just being himself. And as far as the other 2 tracks on this, Phantom of the Opera, we discussed this on the Killers episode. I love this version. It's the one where it starts with Paul Di'Anno saying, "Oh, we're going to do the one that he wants to do, Phantom of the Opera." And as I said on that episode, I just kind of want to know the conversation that happened before that. What was the other song that they were going to do?
Yeah, I love the intro to Drifter as well, where he's just like, "All right, boys, when you're ready, this is a song called Drifter."
Yeah,
Drifter was actually the encore during that show. So yeah, they would have been getting back up on stage then. So when you're ready would have been appropriate.
That makes total sense. It wouldn't have been an opening song, When You're Ready. And I guess, Women in Uniform, we, as you mentioned, it is kind of odd that they're competing with themselves by releasing Women in Uniform again. But of course, this is also a very limited release.
True.
And I believe Phantom of the Opera, the live version, might have been from the Women in Uniform single. I'm not 100% certain. Yes, it is. Sorry, according to my notes, it's the B side. So you get the A side and the B side, and maybe this was, I don't know, some kind of Japanese special release that included that entire single. You get that and a bonus, and they call it Live Plus. I don't know, Harrison. I don't know.
Yeah, Maiden are like can be very bipolar with how they go about choosing the songs they release. Because on one hand, they're like they didn't put Wrathchild and Sanctuary on the first album because they already had those on Metal from Others. But then you
Right.
get to like Maiden Japan, and they're putting Killers and um, Wrathchild on there that had already appeared on like Live at the Rainbow sort of thing, and then Live at the Rainbow had Phantom of the Opera, which already appeared on Live Plus One. So it's sort of like, you know, on one hand they'll do right by the fans and make sure that they give them as much songs, but then when it comes to picking like for these limited track Diana releases, there is a fair bit of overlap. Oddly enough.
It all probably has to do with different regions and things that I am not aware of and couldn't find out in my research leading up to this episode. Having said that, though, viewers, if you have a copy of Live Plus One that you would like to sell to grab a stack of Rocks archives, I would love to have an official release of this. I've only ever seen it in person once, and it was $100 Canadian when I saw it maybe a decade ago. So I would love to have it. This is what you call a holy grail. And just one more note about the cover. I like how the word live is also in the Iron Maiden font. You don't see them use the actual Iron Maiden font on random words very often. And
Yeah,
that's
that's the
a
only time
rare
I can think of
example.
off the top of my head. You get to see other letters in their
Yeah.
official Maiden layout. You know, I think Live Plus One is a little bit of a hidden gem, despite the fact you can get the B side elsewhere as a single. As you know, I'm into the bootleg, so I've got a bit of extra Diana live material, but I don't think you can count out Live Plus One, and it's a shame it hasn't got any form of reissue because there's some good stuff there that you can't get anywhere else, like Drifter and Sanctuary.
Well, I said it myself. I think it's the best version of Drifter that you can buy officially, or can't buy any more officially, but could.
There's also a Greek re-release from the mid '80s of Live Plus One with dubious authenticity that puts Maiden Japan on there as well for an extended track listing.
I wonder what that sounds like. I would be willing to give it a listen if I found one.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't say no if I stumbled across one, but yeah, I wonder how much input the band had on that.
I would say
Probably
that
little if I
much.
had to
That
guess.
much. Anyway, our next release that we're going to look at is now available on DVD, but it dates back to the Diano era. Harrison, why don't you tell us about this one?
Live at the Rainbow. Sorry, I'm looking at a different tab. Let me make sure it's on screen. Live at the Rainbow as part of the early days DVD. Now, this back in the day was released as a half an hour VHS. It was recorded on the 21st of December 1980. So, astute Maiden fans will recognize this as the second time they played the Rainbow in that year. And as such, this features Adrian Smith on guitar. Now, Live Plus One, which we just discussed, actually featured Dennis Stratton. So there is a bit of difference here in addition to a few extra songs. So kicks off with the Ides of March, which runs straight into Wrathchild. Now you'll recognize this as the traditional 1-2 punch from the Killers album. Or if you take a look at the extended track listing, you'll see that Sanctuary was actually the first proper song they played. So they did a very nice job of blending Ides of March into Wrathchild there. Now, this version of Wrathchild became a sort of music video of sorts. You can get it on the extended version or the enhanced 1998 remaster of Killers, and it appears on Visions of the Beast. It's a great rendition, as always. It is really hard to mess up Wrathchild, and the band do it very well. Killers appears here with its altered lyrics, or not altered lyrics, its original lyrics. Paul Diano in I believe it's the 12 Wasted Years documentary, though it could be the history of Iron Maiden Part 1. They both cover similar eras. Claims he made the lyrics up 5 minutes before the show. However, these lyrics also appear on the BBC Archives Live at the Reading, which was recorded a few months prior. So I think he's misremembering, and he made the lyrics up before the previous Rainbow show earlier in the year. But it is nice to get these alternate version. Back in the day, this was the only version of the alternate Killers lyrics you could get until BBC Archives was released. Now you do get Remember Tomorrow, which we'll also talk about on Maiden Japan. Great rendition as always. Diano can sing every bit of it great, and he shrieks perfectly fine. Now here's an odd one: Transylvania. For them to actually put a live version of an instrumental on a live release like this, it shows both the strength of their instrumentals and the band's confidence in them, because this is an awesome rendition of Transylvania, and I personally love the Iron Maiden instrumentals, so it's really nice to see it performed on stage with video. And as we approach the end, we get Phantom of the Opera, another rendition of it. This one is great, but it's funny to watch because there were technical difficulties during the filming of the show, and they had to redo it. So there are some shots where Diano has his jacket on, and then some shots where he has his shirt off. And lastly, of course, you finish off with Iron Maiden, a great rendition. The on-stage Eddie in this case is actually 3 Eddies with giant torches waving it around in the smoke, rather than the traditional huge backstage Eddie that you get normally. Now, a little, I guess you'd call it an Easter egg, but it's a little minor flub that the band does in this. It's, you've got the riff after the like, and it starts going back into the third verse. The guitarist actually plays the for like a half a second when it's supposed to be the verse chug riff before realizing, and then like instantly corrects it back into the riff. So it's just a little something to keep an ear out for, that reminds you that it's actually live and the band were indeed that good on stage, apart from the occasional flub.
That sounds awesome, Harrison. I haven't watched that in a while, but I will have to give that a review.
No, yeah, I really do like it. I'd love to get an extended official version. I do have a bootleg in the mail of the full show, but that is an audience recording. Okay. Sounds great, audience recording, but it's not the same.
A lot of audience recordings do sound quite good. All right. Final release for this episode is a little EP that I grew up with. And I'll just bring out my Super 7 Reaction Eddie. There he is right there. And Harrison has the CDs.
There are 3 versions of Maiden Japan on the screen right now, on my screen. There's the original vinyl, there's the first 10 years CD, and then there's the bootleg CD with an extended full show. Now we've got the 4th Mike's vinyl. Yours has 5 tracks, so does mine, because in Australia you got Wrathchild.
And as you saw during the show intro, there was an earlier version that depicted Eddie decapitating Paul Diano. For obvious reasons, this was withdrawn when Paul Diano left the band. This was the very last thing that they ever did with Paul Diano. They would revisit the decapitation motif a little bit later on, that we'll talk about in this series, but I vastly prefer this. I've always thought this was classy looking artwork. Super 7 do sell an Eddie with like a chromed samurai sword, but this is good enough, I think. I love this release. As I said at the beginning, I grew up with the cassette, the original Canadian cassette, which had all 5 tracks on side A, and then you'd flip them over and you get all 5 tracks on side B. And when I was growing up, this was the only Paul Diano that I initially had available to listen to. So these are my default versions of these songs. When I hear these live versions, Running Free and Remember Tomorrow on side A, with Wrathchild, Killers, and Innocent Exile on side B, these are the very first versions I ever heard. These are the ones that I know. And when I listen to this, it's kind of like just putting on a warm pair of gloves or an old jacket that you like. It just feels right. Everything fits. It's like your memory just kind of clicks. And all these versions are, again, they're my defaults. And, there's little things about this that I relish every time I hear them. Like when, at the very beginning of Running Free, Paul Diano.
Yeah, I want you to sing for me.
And it was so different. Like when I heard this, okay, for context, Live After Death was the newest Iron Maiden album. So I'm used to like, fucking scream for me. And then I want you to sing for it. Totally different. And to be honest, we were kids. We preferred the more screamy operatic vocals of Bruce Dickinson to Paul Di'Anno. But I think we all acknowledge that this was a pretty good release. And considering that Running Free was the newest single when I was growing up, comparing it to this one, I had no problem with Paul's version. Even though Bruce's, honestly, I didn't like it nearly as much as Paul's. And we'll talk about those things later on in the series when Bruce joins the band. But here at the very tail end of Paul Di'Anno's tenure in Iron Maiden, they put out a killer, no pun intended, killer 5-song EP. Although, as you'll see with Harrison's, there is a 4-song version. Find the 5-song version,
the first 10 years CD reissue is a 4-song version. And this is the Japanese version too. They don't even give you a bonus track.
Yeah, it's the US version of, I think there's a Killers bonus disc in the US
the Killers
version.
1995 bonus disc in the US region only has all 5 Maiden Japan songs on CD.
And I think my buddy Johnny,
that's another Grail item.
That. Yeah, it is. It's another Grail item. This is my only copy with all 5 tracks. The last thing I want to point out are the liner notes. Oh, and you know what? We should also talk about where this was recorded and all that stuff. I'll just read this off the back. All tracks recorded live at the Kosei Nenkin Hall, Nagoya, Japan on May 23, 1981. Mixed at Nimbus 9 in Toronto. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Produced and mixed by Iron Maiden and Doug Hall. And then your favorite quote. A couple of overdubs, but who gives a crap anyway?
Yeah, the liner notes are a treat. Like Rod Smallwood doing the photos is a bit of an oddity as well. They had a very long and successful partnership with Ross Halfin for most of their career, but I suppose this might have been before that. I love the EP. I love that we get a live version of Running Free with Di'Anno, a great live version at that. Killers appears with its not the original lyrics, the updated album lyrics that we're used to hearing. And Innocent Exile, a song that I didn't care for as much on Killers, I think makes a really good finale to this EP. And particularly the dual guitars sound great on this live version of it, and it is my preferred version of it. And I'm glad that there's a version out there that I think is great, because it is a good song. I just sort of got drowned out by all the better stuff on Killers, in my opinion. But I do have this bootleg, which has 16 songs and then a live version of I've Got the Fire from the Marquee that's put on there for whatever reason. I don't know, fill up the CD. So what this gets you, it's a soundboard recording from the 24th of May, 1981, which was the Tokyo show. So what you get on here, that other than, soundboard quality recording through everything else, the unique stuff is Purgatory, which doesn't appear live on any officially released Iron Maiden stuff. You get Another Life, including the drum solo with Mr. Clive Burr on drums, that I believe you can get Another Life on the Live at the Ruskin audience recording that's on here, but not only is it not great quality, I don't know if you get the drum solo or not. I haven't watched it in a while. You also get Genghis Khan, another Iron Maiden instrumental. Twilight Zone, they do like to play their non-album tracks occasionally. Strange World, which, as we know, was retired after this tour. Murders in the Rue Morgue, which doesn't get a Di'Anno live version. Phantom of the Opera played at breakneck speed. The funny thing I like about Running Free here is that you actually hear Steve talking to the audience as well. There's a point where Di'Anno, after he introduces Running Free, and the audience are clapping along, Steve's like, "Come on!" And then he says something else. And then I think at the very end of the show, he also says, thanks, everyone. And you hear that on Beast Over Hammersmith as well. Steve also thanks the audience at the end. Like he's there intruding on the frontman space, which you don't actually hear on any official live stuff, but it's cool to hear. Transylvania appears, but with its extended Dave Murray guitar solo, and you get an awesome version of Drifter with the yo-yo-yos. So a nice, very good bootleg to pick up if you can find it.
Which I haven't yet, so that would be a nice find as well. I think a while ago I did an episode of Tim's Vinyl Confessions called Please Re-Release These, and please re-release this. full
In full,
5-track,
preferably.
if not the whole shebang that Harrison only has in bootleg form, at least the full 5 tracks on CD. Reissue this in some way, shape, or form because it's so good. I would say, Harrison, for all the releases we've talked about tonight, I would give them all 5 out of 5-star ratings.
Yes, for their like length versus other releases of said length, I would also agree. Or Maiden Japan and Live at the Rainbow, definitely 5 out of 5 stars, maybe 4 for Live Plus One.
I'm going to go 5 on Live Plus One just simply because it has those extremely raw versions of Sanctuary and Drifter being my favorite version of that song. So that's why I'm giving it the extra point. But folks, you can judge for yourselves. What do you think about Iron Maiden Live Plus One, Live at the Rainbow, and of course, Maiden Japan, the most well-known, I would think, of these 3 EPs and live releases with Paul Di'Anno. So unfortunately, that is it for the entire Paul Di'Anno era of Iron Maiden. There would never be a reunion. There would never be any kind of performance with the 2 parties ever again. Apparently, it came down to simple creative differences.
In 12 Wasted Years, Paul basically chalks it up to creative differences. 12
Right.
Wasted Years was an official documentary released by the band.
Right.
From the mid-80s, and I believe he corroborates this in the History of Iron Maiden Part 1, and Maiden don't dispute that. I mean, there was always the media speculation that it was drugs hampering his performance, but I haven't heard a bad performance from him, and there's no corroboration from the band or anyone else about drugs. So the only thing that's been put out there is creative differences.
And I believe that the catalogs of both Paul Solo and Iron Maiden going forward are corroborating evidence to that.
Absolutely.
Obviously,
Paul didn't play a single Iron Maiden song on his first solo tour.
and Iron Maiden were going in a vastly different direction, and Paul acknowledges he's just not into that style. But we will be back again to talk about that next time. There's a new direction, a new singer, some guy by the name of Bruce from a band called Samson, who, of course, appeared earlier in this series, intertwined with Iron Maiden. So the story goes on, and we will see you next time with another special guest right here on Grab a Stack of Rock.